Welcome back, everyone, to the Chip Lunch Podcast. My name is Joel, and I am flying solo as a host today because other people don't think this podcast is as important as I do. However, we always have a guest, and we have a guest joining us today because we always like to set sail on a journey to hear about someone's Christian walk. And today's voyage is with Sandi Bailey. Hello.
Hello.
Well, welcome to the podcast.
No worries.
It's been lovely to have you on for the first minute of the podcast. That's what I should be saying at the end of the podcast. You're saying you're a little bit nervous though. You want to? Why is that?
I'd probably prefer to be in your seat and asking the questions.
Oh, really?
Rather than answering the questions.
Okay. Are you usually interviewing other people? Is that why?
I have done for a long portion of my career.
Job interviews?
Job interviews, but I worked in workers' comp rehab for a really long time, and you do a lot of interviewing of
So
workers.
are you faking it? Is that basically what you're doing?
Not quite.
Or you had a set of questions to figure out if they were faking it?
Yeah, so just in coordinating someone's rehab, you interview them, you've got to interview their employer and find out what the job involves. So, so usually doing a lot of the question asking, not so much the question answering.
Tables have turned.
Yes.
Well, don't worry about it. Lots of people come on here and say, I haven't got anything to say, and our podcast goes for an hour. So
we'll see.
And you have to have a train to catch reasonably soon. Are you willing to reveal what that train is?
Yeah, I'm going to see a friend of mine who's in hospital.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought it was like, I'm going to see a friend of mine and we're going out for dinner. No, okay. All right. Sorry to bring you down on that. Welcome to the podcast, as I said. Now, are you ready for me to ask the first question?
I am.
How do you like to eat your hot chips?
Well, you'll be very pleased. I am plain salt all the way.
And always works really well when the other hosts aren't here. Good job. Thank you.
Sorry, Ethan and Braden.
Don't apologise. Do not apologise.
So that will bring the tally.
Oh. Now, see, this is what you did. You did show me. You have gone through every episode and tallied up who has gone chicken salt and plain salt. Is that right?
I have.
Amazing. This is amazing.
So with my plain salt edition,
yes,
the scores will be.
Yes, tell me.
Chicken salt, 35.
Oh, hang on. This is going to be close then.
Plain salt, 27.
Oh, I'm still behind though. We're still behind.
But my preference would probably be at this point to have sweet potato chips.
Oh, really?
With plain salt.
With plain salt, yes.
And aioli.
Yes, that does go nicely with sweet potato.
But my growing up fave was the potato chips with plain salt. Sometimes a bit of vinegar, but definitely the wrapped in newspaper variety.
Oh, really? And
preferably consumed on a wet, cold day.
Yes, that is really nice. It is very nice, isn't it? And sometimes there's something about eating it outside in that kind of weather, as long as you're undercover, if it's wet.
Or in a car, looking out over the ocean.
Open up the boot. That is cool.
Or very hastily grabbing them before you hopped on the bus on the way home from school.
Oh, yes. That is something about after school, when you finish school early, you could go and get chips. Or we used to, on a Wednesday at my school, we used to go down near Gymea Station. And there was a place, I can't remember what it was called, but we'd all go there because they had cheap burgers. Cheap burger and chips, yep. So.
No, mine was not early because I went to a private school.
Oh, did you?
And spent probably about an hour and a half each way commuting to school.
Really?
And so it would be probably about 4:25 when I'd got off the train at Miranda. And the bus driver was really cool, and he'd wait for us, so he'd know that we were in there getting potato scallops or potato chips.
So he's like, as long as you get me one.
And he'd wait for us to get our chips and then get on the bus.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, cool. All right, so hang on. Is there, you've done the whole tally. Does that, I was asking you this before we started recording, but did you actually listen to every podcast or just listen to the start of every podcast?
I have not finished listening to Beth's.
Okay.
Which has
only just
today.
Come out. Yes, that's only just come out. Lovely.
But I have listened to everybody else's.
Well, thank you very much for listening to all the podcasts, because that's really cool. And you do it on a morning walk, is that right?
I usually do.
Yeah. How long is the walk? Is it
as long as a minutes podcast? To an hour.
Yeah, okay.
So some of them have gone a little bit longer. So I might pause it and then listen to the remainder the next morning when I go for a walk.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is it going for a walk is every morning?
pretty much most mornings.
Tell me why. Why do you go for a walk every morning? Because I like this.
Partly because I wanted to improve my fitness and improve my weight.
Get some movement.
But I really enjoy walking. I prefer to walk outside. I will go to the gym and go on the treadmill, but that's not as preferable.
That's not always near
but
as good.
But at the moment, it's super dark
when
I'm going for a walk.
It is, isn't it?
If I'm going into the office, I'm out walking at about 5:35, so it's pitch black at the moment.
It is really. I mean, I think when we're recording this, Sunday, I think is when daylight saving comes off, doesn't it? So that will make things a little bit brighter.
Yep.
But I have noticed how dark it has been recently. It's do you reckon I feel like I'm sleeping differently, or I'm I wake up groggy because I'm my body thinks I should still be asleep because it's darker? Or you're same time every day though, are you?
Oh, similar, yeah. Usually somewhere between 5:30 and 6.
Yeah. I'm actually similar to that too, but I've got 3 young children to get out the door. So I don't have time for an hour walk. Yeah, that's amazing. You get to get that walk in. And do you get to spend some time kind of thinking about things and stuff like that when you're walking? Yeah,
sometimes I'll just listen to music. I sometimes bump into people from church.
Oh, that's cool.
Shout out to Luke Crawshaw, who spied me one morning and let me cross the road in front of her driving.
It's following you.
So sometimes I'll listen to music. Sometimes I'll listen to a YouVersion devotion.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Yeah.
How do they go? Because I haven't tried any of them before.
They're good. It's interesting depending on whether you choose which translation of the Bible you choose to listen to. Yep. Someone's spoken on this podcast already about the guy who reads the NIV one having quite a deep serious voice.
That's true.
The guy who reads the what's it called? A more contemporary version is a little bit easier to listen to. And sometimes I like to listen to a different translation that I'm not as familiar with because it can put a slightly different spin on a very familiar Bible passage.
Yeah, that makes sense. I read a story about, just talking about walking, I read a story about, I believe, the philosopher Kierkegaard. So he was Danish, and he would, I think, I've got to get this right, he would write for 4 hours on whatever he was talking about or thinking about. And then he would get out and walk for 4 hours because he felt like that would help him figure out his thoughts, but also he'd be part of the community of wherever he was. I think he might have been in Copenhagen. And to actually start thinking about, it would inform his writing, but then also he'd be processing his thoughts. So I think you're right. I think there is something about walking, isn't there, that you can just get things done that are important, but you can't get done other times, but you're also exercising at the same time. So it makes a lot of sense. Right. Well, you've talked about listening to the Bible, so that means you're a Christian a lot of the time. What the second question we always ask everyone is, how did you become a Christian?
Well, I had the immense privilege of growing up in a Christian family. So similar to some other people, there's probably not a time in my life that I didn't know God, didn't know Jesus, didn't know about going to church. I didn't always think that way. I think as I went through my teenage years, there was a sort of sense of it would not be nice to have a bit more of a dramatic conversion and have a really clear, defined point of when you were a non-Christian to when you were a Christian. But as I've grown older, I certainly have recognised that having grown up in a Christian family had a lot of benefits and have come to appreciate that.
And so something that we always talk about with people that grew up in Christian families, and a lot of them say, I didn't know any different, really, which is sometimes hard for me to wrap my head around because I come from a non-Christian family. And it also is something that makes me think, what are my children going to be like? Because both my wife and I come from not Christian families, but they're growing up in a Christian family, so it's very different. But what there's always those people that we talk about that have grown up in a Christian family. They always talk about these moments where I had to take on my faith myself, or I moved away from it, or I thought I needed to have more dramatic conversion. There's moments in your life that you can remember that.
So when I was 14, I definitely made a choice to have a faith of my own, and I was baptised at that stage. Was it massively different? Probably not, but at least it was my choice. It wasn't just that I was, going to church because my parents and my family did. But then, different life circumstances as I've grown older have certainly challenged that at different times. Yep. Yeah.
And so did you grow up in the Shire?
I am not a Shire girl.
That's okay.
I was not born in the Shire.
Either was I, don't worry.
I migrated down here when back in the 3-term school years, so that gives you some idea of how old I am before we had 4 terms.
Oh, I don't want to cast aspersions. So
I moved down here in what used to be the August school holidays
From
of
where
year
though?
6, and I'd grown up at Maroubra.
Oh, okay,
in the eastern suburbs.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. And so for my last term of year 6, I refused to change schools. So I would catch the train from Miranda to Bondi Junction and then get a bus from Bondi Junction to Wallara, where I was going to school.
And is that the private school you're talking about, or was that for high school?
So my high school is where I went to a private school.
So why were you so intent on not changing schools? You just wanted to finish all of school?
Yeah, I'd gone to an OC
school?
class, so I'd changed schools in year 5 from Maroubra Junction Primary to Wallara, and I didn't want to leave my friends a term early because I knew that at the end of year 6 we would all be going our different ways anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So that's quite a long way to travel as you would have been 11, 12?
Yep,
11. Anything you can tell us about that time? Did it teach you anything having to travel that far?
Well, my dad would come on the train with me, and initially he would come through to Bondi Junction and put me on the bus. So first of all, he came on the bus with me and dropped me at school. Then he just put me on the bus at Bondi Junction, and then once I was confident, he'd get off at Martin Place and I'd continue on to Bondi Junction and do it all myself. I do remember having an experience because I'd catch the train, like the bus and the train home on my own. I do remember being hugged by what would have been probably a homeless, intoxicated man.
Sounds like an enjoyable experience for her.
When I was, at Bondi Junction. And I just remember thinking it was strange, but I wasn't, I don't think I was super, super scared from what I remember.
Well, that's good that it worked out that way for you.
Yeah.
But could be that could have gone a lot worse.
Yeah.
That's what we could say about that, wouldn't it? So then you moved to you'd moved to the Shire.
Yep.
High school. You said you went to a private school.
Yes,
what school was that?
I went to MLC at Burwood.
MLC, does that stand for?
It stood for Methodist Ladies College, but the Methodist Church was no longer sort of functioning, so it was just called MLC School, and it came under the Uniting Church banner.
Every time I hear MLC, it makes me think of the investment bank, the ads they used to have with that golden egg.
The golden egg.
Yeah, that's what it made me think of. Is there no golden eggs at actual MLC, the school?
There were many other suggestions for what it stood for.
Okay, I'm guessing you're not going to say them. Or is it?
Some of them were like man's last chance. All the stupid things that, teenagers would come up with.
That's really funny. I'm sorry, what suburb was that in?
It's in Burwood.
I was in Burwood. So you're catching a train to Redfern and then out to Burwood?
Yep. Right.
Tell me about the private school experience and what it's like, because I didn't go to a private school.
It's very interesting. I'll be honest, I really enjoyed my high school. I enjoyed...
That's great. You don't have to be sad about enjoying your high school experience.
I was not a popular kid. I was probably a poor kid by that school's standards. Right. In that, at the time I came from a single car family. When I got my learner's permit, my dad did not buy me a blue BMW
Yeah.
or a Suzuki Vitara,
Suzuki.
which was very common.
It's a big difference between Suzuki Vitara and BMW. But anyway, any car would have been great. But
there was a lot of
affluent.
very, very affluent people. My parents chose to invest in my brother and I very generously for us both to learn musical instruments, and paid a lot of money in both tuition and purchase of instruments.
I see.
And so I suppose what I learnt in time was that they invested in us rather than in material possessions. But yeah, I did enjoy that I only competed against girls. People often said, but going to a single-sex school, how do you learn to relate to the opposite sex? Well, I had 3 hours every day on the train with plenty of boys, so there was plenty of socialising with the opposite sex.
I see.
There were things that I didn't like about school in that...
We're always going to be like that, I suppose.
Yeah, being such an affluent place, I really remember Mufti Day being something that I really despised. And so I think probably by the time I got to year 10, I would pay the gold coin donation and wear my uniform rather than try and compete in the affluent fashion stakes.
I see. And did you just pretend that you forgot? Because I remember once I forgot a Mufti Day, I got back in the car and drove home. I got changed and came back to school.
No, it was probably something that by that point I just really didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And what's it like, what's the Christian influence on that place? I shouldn't say on that school, on that place sounds, I'm casting aspersions on that school as well. But was there a Christian influence at that school?
Yeah, so at that time, when I was at school, the headmaster was actually a reverend and went on to become the moderator of the Uniting Church. Mm-hmm. So it was very overtly Christian. We had a chaplain at school, and every day we would have assembly that consisted of singing a hymn from the Blue Australian Hymn Book. And
are there other colours you can collect? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I just think there will be people that know exactly what hymn book I'm talking about.
Yeah, okay.
So it was quite overtly Christian at that time. As opposed to a lot of those private schools that sit under the banner of a church not necessarily being overtly Christian.
And did that have an impact on your faith and your Christian walk?
Yes, but not necessarily positively.
That's okay. Tell us why. We're here for all stories, not just the positive ones.
I think... there was, probably much like there is today, there's a lot of stereotype and negativity about Christianity, which was the same back then. And I already felt like I was, I wasn't in the popular trendy group, and I really didn't want to identify even further with a group that wasn't positively revered. People knew that I was a Christian, but I refused to go to any of the Christian groups at school. So we had Crusaders, and I just did not want to identify with them at all. But I was quite happy to go to church and go to youth group and invite some of my friends to youth group, even school friends, in my local area. Just didn't want to do it at school.
I want to ask you about church and youth group, but in a second, I was just going to ask you, why did you not want to identify with that at school? Do you think you already felt on the outer and didn't want to?
Yeah, I was probably, if you talk about the daggy spectrum, I was probably already down, the less popular daggy end, and didn't want to slide even further down that continuum.
Just so you know, I'm not laughing at you. I just think daggy is a funny word. That's all. Okay, but it was more about like how you're perceived at school as well. Yeah,
and wanting to be accepted and not wanting to stand out, which is...
But that's the thing at school, isn't it? Like, for any age, it's like, don't want to look too much on the outer, because then you'll cop it, but like, you're not popular, so I'll just try and cruise in the middle and not
fly under the radar.
fly under the radar, because then I won't be exposed. And I think that's like we've talked about before, like even when we have Braden and Ethan on and myself, like some of it, me and Braden have talked about it in particular, of not feeling like we really stood out enough and regretting that, because it would actually be a way of, first of all, standing out, but also like I think you could show that you could love other people the way you wanted to, or the way like you were inspired to by Jesus. So that's why I said it's okay to have some stories where you don't feel very, very maybe positive about your choices that you made at that time, but that's okay, because it's all a process. It's all a journey, as I said.
Yeah.
So youth group and church. So what church were you going to, and then what was youth group like?
Okay, so my family came from a Churches of Christ background.
Okay.
So when we moved down here, I was at Caringbah Church of Christ, and so probably started coming there when I was sort of in year 4, because we used to come down this way anyway to go to my grandparents every second Sunday, and then we moved down here, so I was at that church until I was 18, 19, yeah.
And what's youth group like? But before I ask you that, can you, for someone who doesn't know, those of us on the podcast listening or hosting it, what's the difference between Churches of Christ and an Anglican church, for example? Is there many differences?
Look, I think if you talk about it in a continuum, they're probably a little bit more liberal than the Anglican church, but they believe the same thing. So it's the same God. We believe in, Jesus died and he rose again on the third day, and it was, he basically atoned for our sins, and it's through that we have a relationship with God. So the basic premise is the same. It's probably just some of the religious rules and practices that different.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Cool. That's fine. Like I said, I just didn't know myself. And then youth group. What was youth group like?
Yeah, youth group was a lot of fun. I was a bit of a tomboy. I think Anna said she was a bit of a tomboy growing up. I was pretty much the same.
Love how you keep referencing all the different episodes you've listened to, by the way. But keep going, please.
Yeah, so I was a bit of a tomboy, and
What does that mean though? What does that look like for you?
Oh, for me, I would. Like, I remember one particular family at church had 3 boys, twin boys and an older boy, and he was very similar age to me, and we used to go out in the tinny, go womping in the tinny out board hacking,
right.
And I'd be there in board shorts and swimmers, just like the boys basically, and would do everything the boys did. Yeah, I wasn't a particular girly girl.
Yep.
But I remember, having a great time. I used to love going down to Stanwell Tops, which is a Churches of Christ campsite down there, and playing wide games, crawling through the bush in the dark with camo paint on your face and doing chalk chases.
Yeah, that's always fun.
An all-time fave was the time that you had to go down, and this is the pre-digital era, so you had a disposable camera.
Yes.
And
very good.
You'd have to, where Caringbah Church of Christ was on the corner of the Kingsway and Jacaranda near the swimming pool.
Yep.
And we had to go all the way down to Cronulla police station and get a photo in the back of a paddy wagon as part of the chalk chase.
So did you commit a crime to be able to do that, or you just requested?
The poor police at Cronulla station just had a random collection of teenagers streaming in at different stages.
Yeah.
Can I get a photo in the back of a
and
paddy
they're
wagon?
like, Christians.
Probably.
As my dad would call them, the God Squad.
And probably I did eat a lot as a teenager, even though I was an absolute twig. So probably a personal fave was the progressive or the regressive dinners.
Okay, progressive I understand. What's regressive?
You have dessert first and you go backwards.
I thought it meant like you just have like smaller and smaller portions or something.
Just eat your dinner backwards.
Okay. They were always fun.
Yeah.
I've
And
done
I
that
think
before.
we were really lucky at that time. We had some combined events. So I do remember one time going out to somewhere all the ride people would be very familiar with, Macquarie Ice Rink, and actually
yes, I've heard
having
about that
a combined youth event where youth groups from all over Sydney came and just went ice skating. Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a dab hand at ice skating?
I can go in both directions.
Oh, well, see, yeah, that's better than me, I reckon.
Not backwards, so I wouldn't say I'm a dab hand.
You can go in back both directions.
Yeah,
like,
so you can go clockwise and anti-clockwise,
okay.
which some people can't even do that.
I think I can do
go
that.
backwards.
Yeah, okay. I thought you were saying you could go backwards. I
Yeah.
can't go backwards yet. It's like I go ice skating every week.
Yeah.
Not true. I think the last time I went ice skating was in Melbourne years ago. Anyway, that's enough reminiscence from me. I was just going to ask you the question, like, you describe yourself as a tomboy. Do you think that was a conscious choice? Because you talked about when you were at school, like it was a conscious choice not to be part of the Christian groups. Do you think being a tomboy was as well?
Well, I had an older brother and 2 male cousins that I grew up with.
You wanted to be a bit like them.
So, I hung out with them. I was indoctrinated into what was back then touring car racing.
Oh, were you? Let's talk.
Pre-V8 supercar
So
era.
Australian Touring Car Championship?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Who's your favourite driver?
Oh, gosh.
Why are
it's
you
a
rolling
bit
your eyes?
traumatising.
Why?
Going back. Well, it wasn't necessarily by choice that I watched
you
these
just
things.
had to watch it.
It was just majority rules.
Oh, you're right.
Pre-streaming.
Yes.
It was majority rules gets to watch whatever.
So
they
how old are
wanted
you
to.
watching the touring cars?
Oh, gosh, probably from 12. The age of 12 onwards, maybe a bit younger.
What's your best memory about touring cars? Because I'll be able to hang with you a little bit.
Probably hitting the kangaroo at the top of Mount Panorama.
Yes. Who hit that kangaroo?
Ford driver.
It was a Ford, and I can't remember who actually hit it. Was it Marcus Ambrose?
Can't remember.
I can't.
But I do remember all of the, big rivalries
Did you see the recent one a few years ago? Was an echidna on the track?
Yes.
Yeah. It's always on that same part of Mount Panorama.
Mount Panorama.
Coming out to the cutting. It's always the same.
So I suffered through that, and then it was Formula One. And
oh,
then one
yes.
Of my cousins
talk to me more.
Also took up riding motorbikes, so then it was MotoGP.
Oh, right. Lots of motor racing. I love this. I'm very happy to talk as long as possible about this. I'm trying to find...
I liked old Formula One. I don't like new Formula One so much.
Old Formula One is what era?
Oh, probably
the
more
90s?
Around Senna and stuff.
And Senna's my favourite driver.
Where it's a bit more competitive, I think, they've changed so much about the sport in terms of the vehicles that there's not as much variation. It's sort of whoever ends up on pole position, unless they crash out, they pretty much win. Pretty much. Or break down, yeah.
I've just looked up a YouTube video of all the times kangaroos have invaded Bathurst. But that's the 2020 Bathurst 12 hour, so that's not the one you're talking about. Right, so you didn't have much choice in that one.
No.
So it was really
so
back to the question. It was just like you didn't really have a choice, but you just wanted to hang out.
It was just what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so in terms of like talking about your Christian faith, towards the end of high school, does anything change? Because then at some point you start to make more choices for yourself rather than...
Yeah, not so much towards the end of high school because I'm young for my years, so... and I didn't get my licence until I was at uni.
Suzuki Fodara?
No.
Suzuki Fodara is a funny car.
Inherited the family Bomador.
I like that. My wife's first car was a big Ford station wagon, and because the number plate was WOB, they call it the Bobbygong. And it was just like this big animal that lived on the seabed, just travelling around the Shire.
Well, I had the Bomador, which was the car that really should have had a 6-cylinder engine, but only had a 4-cylinder, so it was a bit of a slug.
Just didn't really move.
It was cream with a beige vinyl interior.
Goodness.
And its number plate was LOL 375. I think LOL meant nothing back then, but now I think it was a fairly apt name for that car.
That combo, cream on the outside, cream on the inside. Ooh, it's beautiful. Not really what
No.
I don't know really what inspired your parents to buy
I don't know.
such a gorgeous motor car.
It was horrendous, and I was very good at. I'd always have a hammer in the car because when I drove to uni, the starter motor was a bit bodgy, so I learned.
I thought you were going to say you had to fight off men.
No, the way you did it was you hit it, and you'd tap the solenoid, and you'd be able to start the car again.
I've heard about that, but I've never done it. But did it start every time?
It did until it didn't. Eventually,
Yeah,
and they had to replace the starter motor, but as a poor uni student.
I thought you were going to say the car, but
I did. I ended up selling
motor.
the car, and
for a tidy profit, I'm sure.
I think I was just relieved to see it go.
I'll take it at any price. Bye-bye. You're out of here. Right. So what did you do at uni?
I did a Bachelor of Applied Science in Occupational Therapy.
Oh, wow. But you don't do that now, do you?
No, I went and did further study when I finished uni, and I now work in workplace health and safety.
Oh, okay. So what was this? So did you do the OT course? Sorry, I was trying to remember what the name was.
Yep.
You did an OT course, and then you just go straight into the...
Well, when I did the course, it was 3.5 years, so they compressed a 4-year degree into 3.5 years. So I finished and had 6 months off, and off study. I went straight into a job, and then I enrolled straight away to start my master's the following year.
Oh, so you didn't enjoy it that much that you're like, I need to change?
No, I just wanted to go into a particular field, so I wanted to also go into more of a preventative role. So.
In terms of helping people not hurt themselves at work?
Yep.
Why was that? I find that really interesting because personally, that's something I would like. One of the least things I would want to do.
I think I was just interested in the whole concept of ergonomics and design and the human body and stuff like that.
So that fits the science degree.
Yeah.
But less so the OT after you've injured yourself. You want to prevent people having to have OT.
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
So, so that's, how I, when I finished uni, there were sort of 3 areas that I was genuinely interested in working in. And I went into the occupational rehab area, which was one of those areas, and then I'd like to do some of the preventative stuff. So I went and did more study. And I went from being an undergrad at Sydney Uni to being a postgrad at New South.
Strutting around the campus. I've done this before.
Well, it was very interesting because I'd literally had 6 months of not being at uni, but the difference in the way you were treated as a postgrad to what you were treated as an undergrad was very marked. And I sat there going, and this is all with the passage of 6 months and,
And
and
I've had a break and now I get treated really well.
Yeah, well, I think they realised that there are a lot of people who are working full-time and doing their masters, and they, were a bit more lenient. Like, if you can't get the assignment in, come and talk to us. We'll negotiate an alternative time frame.
Yeah, right. Without
penalty, as opposed to you don't get it in at uni at that time was like you were losing 5% a day.
A day?
A day.
Wow. I don't know if I ever handed in an assignment late. I don't think I did. Doesn't mean they were good. But I don't know if I ever handed anything late. I was just going to ask you, did you engage in any Christian groups while you were there? Because if you finished school at 18, you said, were you at that Churches of Christ church?
I was at Churches of Christ Caringbah Church of Christ until I was sort of 18 and a half. Yes. Which was probably the end of my first year at uni.
Okay.
And then I changed to Engadine Church of Christ, which was interesting because it was very much just me. So obviously I had...
out of your family.
Yeah, so I'd always grown up with being in a church, and I was either Dennis's daughter, Maria's daughter, Matthew's sister. Oh, so now I was just me.
Oh, sorry to kick you. I just kicked you again. But
very much, that was probably one of those points where it was a choice of mine, and it was really owning my own faith and doing my own thing. But no, I definitely did not go to any Christian groups at uni.
This sounds similar to school. I didn't.
I had not changed in my perception from high school. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? We've only just really got to where we're talking about going to uni, but we're talking a lot about like the different choices that you made. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So we might have the title idea already.
To put it into context, I went to Cumberland College of Health Sciences. It had been amalgamated into Sydney Uni. It was at Lidcombe.
Yes.
And my entry to uni was, welcome, here are your 9 subjects for first year. And I'd been to main campus Sydney Uni with my cousins, and I remember saying to the person, but don't I get to choose my own subjects? And they went, nope, here's your 9 subjects, move along.
Really?
And that was it. And it was literally at that point, it was like an extension of school that had boys. Was really the difference. And I think when I first started, I had 28 hours at uni a week.
That's a lot.
The lowest I got to was 16 hours a week in my last 8 weeks of my final year.
And were you regretting your choice of going back to study?
No.
Because of that? No? You loved it?
Yeah, I enjoyed learning.
Good. So. Yeah, cool. What are you doing as a job in between that? Well, you didn't have time if you're doing that much. You wouldn't have much time.
Oh, look, when I was at uni, I worked in retail and I worked in hospitality. When I finished my OT degree, I got a job working full-time in occupational rehab and then did my master's degree part-time.
Yeah, right. Study is a big part of your life after school, not during school. And you said, I didn't ask you a little bit about why did you choose to move to Engadine? Is it because you wanted to take on some choice for yourself?
The minister that had been at the church sort of through my teenage years had gone, and he'd gone to a church in Melbourne. And the church had been searching for a new minister. And my dad was an elder at the church and had been very involved with that. And I'll just say, I don't love politics, but church politics is probably the ugliest sport of all. And
some would say it's not a sport.
A decision was made that a minister that had been at the church before was going to come back. And even though I was young, I think I was only 17 and a half at the time, I didn't think that was the best decision for the church, because I felt that in the 5 years that he'd been gone, the church had changed. There were new people, but there were still some of the same people. And I thought, he's going to come back and he'll know half the congregation and not the other half. And I didn't think it was the right fit, but I stuck at it. I think I lasted about 6 months and then just went, no, I don't think this is for me.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I chose to go and find somewhere else.
And if we're talking about your faith, is that something that you considered, especially, and prayed about it a fair bit? Because I feel like if I was that young, I probably was gone, yes, I made this decision.
To be honest, I don't think I really prayed about it at the time. I just thought, no, this isn't the place for me, and I didn't think it was going to do my faith journey any favours. So it was time to look for something else that might be a better option.
Well, I find it interesting that you were talking about, I didn't think that was going to do well for my faith, and so you already were thinking about it, which is quite interesting. I don't know if I have a question after that. I was just really making a comment. But so if you, sorry about that.
That's all right.
If you were doing uni and you stayed at Engadine Churches of Christ, I should get that right, for the whole time of being at uni?
Yes.
All right. So then you finish your masters.
Yep.
Big success. What are you doing now that you've finished your masters? Do you get into compo claims?
Well, I've still been doing that. So by the time I finished my masters, I'm actually now married.
Oh.
And
we must rewind a little bit. So we'll save whatever's after that end to after we talked about how you got married. So did you just turn up to the altar and there was away we go?
Went, yeah, you'll do.
Okay.
No.
Now tell us how you met Liam.
the minister that had been at my church during my teenage years went to be the minister of Liam's church in Melbourne.
Oh, in Melbourne, yes.
And I had done a lot of babysitting of their 3 boys. And so I said, I'm not saying goodbye, I'm saying hello, free holiday.
Oh, yes, I will turn up.
And so I was in my second year of uni, and in the mid-year break, I took myself to Melbourne, booked in with them to
go
and visit. Mm-hmm. And, it had been an interesting 6 months up until that point. And I had called Paul, who's the minister, and said, I'm coming down and blah, blah, blah. And as we were organising things, he then dropped into the conversation that he would get some of the young people from church to show me round. In particular, there was this guy. And
show you the sights.
And there's this guy, he's tall, he's blonde, he's musical, you two should get on well. Mm. And that really didn't go down well because of...
How dare you tell me what the kind of man I should like?
Well, just because of some social things. Like I'd had a couple of people set me up and I'd had some pretty bad experiences at church with...
Oh, hang on a sec. You didn't talk about this. Okay, let's finish the...
Anyway, so I went to Melbourne. So I went to Melbourne and that's where I met Liam.
Right.
And so for 2.5 years we did long distance between Sydney and Melbourne. And yes, that was pre-digital. So that was no mobile phones, no FaceTime, no texting, no
how many letters did you write? How many letters did you write by pen?
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
Yeah. The best that we had was Express Post, which was if you got it in the mail that afternoon, they'd get it the next day.
Yeah, exactly. 6 p.m, I think.
And we had basically, I think, 2 or 3 phone calls a week because back then everything was an STD call and it was quite expensive.
Oh, that's right. They would charge you more money even if it was outside of New South Wales.
Yep.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's really interesting.
So then he moved to Sydney.
Now, why did he move to Sydney? Of course.
And so he moved up in the January and we got engaged that July and got married the following August.
Right. Very cool. And what church did you get married in? Did you go to Melbourne or did you get married
we got married in Sydney.
Yep.
We actually got married at an Anglican church.
Oh.
But by a Churches of Christ minister, the minister that introduced us.
Wow. Oh. Very, I don't know what the right word is. Could be deemed controversial, but we'll steer clear of that.
It had the permission of the bishop.
And that's great. And so how long have you been married now?
It'll be 28 years in August. That's probably older than you.
You think I'm younger than 28? Is that what you're saying? How old do you think I am?
Actually, you've got 3 children,
so
you're probably...
I love this when people think I'm younger than I am.
32.
No, I'm 36.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, well, you look... Yeah. Anyway. So yes, I'm 36 years old. Glad you think I'm younger. That's good. If
Ethan was here, it'd be older than him.
Yes, I think that... Yes, you are. That is correct. You have been married longer than he's been in...
Existence,
yeah. So just before we continue on talking about being a wife and a mum, talking about these times where people set you up on dates. So do people have a picture in their mind of who you were? And then they're like, oh, that person would be a perfect match for you. This sounds like a real 90s thing. Is that true?
Look, it was just, I think, in my peer group at uni, I was the only one that was single.
Okay.
So everybody else had a partner.
Trying to set you up all the time.
I was part of a Bible study group and they were all coupled up.
Okay.
And there was me and one guy who was single and the guy
you guys should get together.
Oh, yes. Now, the guy who was single was really lovely, and we were really great friends, but I was not interested in a romantic
There just wasn't
relationship.
there wasn't a bit of a spark for a romantic relationship.
And yes, there was a lot of pushing to put us together. He may have made an attempt in that domain,
well,
and
fair enough, but
I didn't subscribe to it, which consequently resulted in me sort of then being pushed to the outer because I didn't go along with it. And yeah, there were some pretty choice moments in there. Probably the ultimate was the moment I chose on a Sunday night after church to swear at the minister who had been involved
in trying to set you up.
Well, yes, and some social events that I'd been excluded from. So
really,
yeah, I might have uttered that I didn't care if so and so had died. Yeah.
Oh wow.
So it was probably one of my more interesting moments.
Hmm.
It was not the minister that married us or introduced us, but
I understand.
consequently I'd had a couple of people then try and set me up, which I was just like, oh gosh, how
and then if it's not working, and
how
then
to feel like a social leper at the age of 18.
and people want to keep making you do that. Is this contributing to why you moved churches as well?
It would have been, yes.
Well, that's fair enough. It's like, just give you a break.
Because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm 18 and you're making me feel like I'm an old maid. So, yes, so there are quite a few things. It was just like, I need to just move on. And, yeah, so I did. And then I met Liam, which I was not looking for a boyfriend at all.
It wasn't your intention,
No,
yeah.
and my mum's final words were, do not find a boyfriend in Melbourne. Yep.
However, you had other ideas. So the question, for those that do come on the podcast that are married and also have children, because you have 2 children, hang on, I've got to remember their names, Danica and Noah. There we go. Sorry. I do remember them, just it's coming a bit slower to the forefront of my brain. Tell me what God has taught you about being a wife, first of all, and then also being a mum. I always enjoy these reflections.
All right, being a wife. Well, being married is a partnership, and it's about working together and also about bringing out the best in each other.
So smoothing the edges off each other too, I think.
Yeah, and look, I must say, you know, we've unfortunately had a lot of people around us whose marriages have not been as successful, and for a variety of reasons. And, you know, there have been times when Liam and I have sat down and said, you know, people say, you know, you have to work at your marriage and it's a conscious choice every day to love the other person. But if I'm truly honest, it's not that hard for Liam and I. You know, we do genuinely get on really well. I think when we fight, it's usually when we're both really tired, and it's usually about stupid things like
isn't every fight like
trivial
that?
things.
Yeah. It's usually like what's or under the surface is what really you want to have the fight about, but you fight about these silly things that push you over the edge.
So so it's just what I've learnt or what it's taught me is just to you've got to make that mind shift that when you're a married couple, it's we, not me. And I would probably say, and I'm sure that, you know, people in my family would echo that I'm not very good at putting myself first. I will put Liam and the kids ahead of me a lot of the time. But you know, at the end of the day, it's about loving the other person for the things that you genuinely like about them, as well as being tolerant of the things that maybe irk you sometimes.
Yeah. Do you have battles over which instruments are better?
No.
The reason I read that's as a segue to ask you, what instrument did you play? I never asked you that.
I played the violin.
Oh, did you?
Mm.
You never felt tempted to do that up front of church?
I did for a very long time.
Oh.
And not uncommon to people that do voluntary ministries. There's often a burnout factor at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, for me, I didn't worship God by playing the violin because I'd grown up playing classical music. That wasn't something that I did to express my adoration and worship of God. I know that a lot of other people really derived pleasure from hearing the violin played in worship, but I didn't enjoy it. I found it nerve-wracking.
Yeah, okay.
And it probably didn't help that I hung around with a lot of people that were musical and then would be critiquing music in church. So that sort of probably raised the anxiety levels about it.
What's your favourite classical piece to play, though? Let's not worry about church. What about just playing?
It'd be, my favourite would be a Dvorak piano quintet.
Yes, know that well. Not really. But you say piano quintet. What does that mean?
So it's a chamber music piece where there are 2 violins, a viola, a cello and a piano.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all together.
Yep.
Right. Do you like playing on your own or with that kind of group?
Neither these days.
Oh. Why don't you play anymore?
Don't want to. I grew up with an older brother.
Yes.
And we both played the violin.
Oh, rather competitive.
I would put myself in the very ugly competitive category for a very long time.
Oh, you're a very competitive person, is that what you mean?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
And
there's all these little things coming out we must return to.
And when you're growing up and you start learning a musical instrument just before you're 5 and you've got a brother who's 2 years older than you and been learning for 2 years longer, you don't rationalise that of course they're going to be that much better because they're older and they've been learning. So, yes, it was very competitive. And my brother is a professional classical musician.
Is he? Right.
And I am not.
Yes.
We would have tracked in terms of our progress pretty similarly the whole way through until I finished school. The difference being is that my brother Matthew did it a lot more easily and with a lot more flair than I did. So you had
to graft a bit more.
Whereas for me it was just dig your heels in, grit. And at one point we did have a violin teacher who thought it would be a really good idea to get my brother to help teach me. And consequently, if you actually know anything about a violin bow, the bow is bowed this way. Mm-hmm. My bow was bowed this way, but also this way from me hitting him with my bow when I get frustrated.
That's not how you play Bach.
So, I did play for a while. I taught violin when I was going through uni and when I first started working. And, I have no regrets learning the violin. It gave me a really genuine appreciation for music and for practice and for persisting. But I was happy to let it go. But it did make me very competitive, and it wasn't until I played in an OzTag team when I was married, and I played with a really good friend, and he is a professional athlete, and not in OzTag, but another sport. Yes. And seeing him in our OzTag team, there was just a moment of, oh my, I am that person in female form, and that is really ugly. And it was literally overnight that I just went, no,
I need to stop.
I'm not going to be like
Really?
that anymore. And so if you play a game with me now, I'll play, but I'm not going to get anywhere near as upset or competitive about it.
And did that competitiveness come just from the violin playing with your brother or something else?
It would have been a byproduct of learning the same instrument. And I think just that, like for me, I've always been fairly self-motivated and will push myself and, want to achieve things, and probably also really strong desire to be accepted and, well regarded. And I was always literally, pardon the pun, second fiddle to my brother.
That is a really good way to wrap up that part of your life.
He's a brilliant musician, and I love going and seeing him perform.
Yeah.
I also realised that I could never live that sort of lifestyle of a professional musician.
Right.
Not my idea of.
Why is that?
It's really unpredictable.
Where your work's coming from and stuff like that.
It's an incredibly niche area. And my brother has been very, very fortunate to be in the top echelons of his field, to actually have a stable position in an orchestra, where he gets a salary. Otherwise, it is truly the gig economy, where you just get paid for your gigs. You do need to be a bit more of a night owl, and so your time, your time clock sort of shifts a bit, and I'm not the biggest night owl.
Well, as we know.
So
you wouldn't be listening to Chip Lunches if you were a night owl. Well, you probably listen to them at night, actually.
Yeah. So so I don't think I could have done it as a career anyway.
Yeah. 2 more questions, because you must get on a train at some point. I asked you about your children, and I'd like to know what Danica and Noah have taught you, or God's taught you through them being a mum.
Yep. Well, my introduction to motherhood was a little bit rocky. So when Noah was 2 weeks old, I actually ended up back in hospital with a massive blood clot, a life-threatening blood clot.
Oh, okay.
So that was probably the first big lesson of, you just don't take anything for granted.
Yeah, you can't really have much plans.
And there were some scary moments in there about, would I die, and would that mean that I would leave Liam with a 2-week-old baby boy? But in general, I think being a parent gives you a very small insight into how God sees us. Yeah. And that aspect of unconditional sort of agape love. And, much as we get frustrated with our children, how much more must God get frustrated with us? But also that, that we've all been created with free will, and as a parent, particularly a parent of now adult children, that, they've got to make their own choices, and, you may not agree or like all of those choices, but you still love them, and, you just, got to walk that journey with them and be there to support them, whatever the outcome will be. And I think that's really what God does with us, because I'm sure there's a lot of times that he's, just
he's like, again,
how many times, and he's just shaking his head. But he's always there, and it's never that he leaves us. It's more that we just turn away and choose to walk another direction for a period of time before we perhaps right our course again.
So in a sense, you're saying it gives you an insight to what God must be experiencing with you all the time.
Yeah.
So it's almost like what right do I have as a parent to get really upset at my children when
Yeah.
I'm doing the same to my Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. Right. Well, to make sure that you actually get your train, because I feel like we haven't really done everything in your life so far. But final question that we always ask everyone is, what do you wish you knew? What do you wish you knew when you were younger that you now know as a Christian?
Probably that, using a Taylor Swift phrase, the haters are always going to hate. And you just recognise that, and then to just be yourself and be true to yourself and not be so concerned about what others might think, and that desire for acceptance. And that's, for me, probably something that I struggled with for a long time, and still doesn't always feel or fit comfortably. But yeah, just to be true to yourself. I think I went through, phases when I was much younger trying to please everybody else, but in the end you can't possibly do that. It becomes untenable, and you often end up losing yourself in that process, and therefore not being true to who you are or who God's created you to be.
I think because we've been talking a lot about like when you made particular choices, and I feel like it's been a little bit of your story is grappling with that, of kind of like what you actually want to do or who you actually are, like who God's created you to be, but also like what would be the right choices, what would God want you to do, like what would other people want you to do, and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think just as we wrap up the chips, as we like to say, I can see, but in your life though, you've made a lot of choices. Like, we're always so hard on ourselves, I think. Whereas I think we can see a lot of the choices that you made throughout your life have actually been on the money. I mean, going to Melbourne, for example, where your
was a good life choice.
Yeah, where your mum was like, "Don't get a boyfriend," and it actually worked out pretty well for you. I think you would agree. So, and I'm sure your mum probably backtracked on that a little bit now.
She loves Liam.
Oh, that's very nice to hear. But I think that's what's been encouraging about it, is that your faith, even though we may not make the right choices all the time, if we're sticking with God, then He's going to get us to the end anyway. Because I don't know if you heard on Saturday night, Michael Greaves preached, and he talked about a story about me and him not making the right choices when we were at school. And it was cool contrast to what Stu saying, is like, in this chance I did make the right choice. But it wasn't about, what's better. It was about, hey, let's try and make sure that we're trying to follow God's will in all our choices. And I think that's why we do this podcast, because you haven't talked about just all the right choices that you've made, but also the ones that you're like, I wish I didn't do that. But I think same when we're listening to Michael preaching that on Saturday night, or hearing you say that, is that we all need to hear that, because we know that we're all sinful, and we all know we don't make the right choices, but we all say, hey, God, if you put God first as much as you can, then we're all pursuing this thing to just get to heaven, really. And I think it's really, I know you were nervous coming on, but I think it's been really good, because I think the reason we do this podcast is for other people to go, I have a similar thing. And that's why we're like, in a sense, we're kind of building community while people are listening to a podcast. That's what we're trying to do. So I think you're a really important part of that. I think it's been really nice to have you on the podcast, and I'm glad that you stuck it out and actually decided to come on, like, because we were texting. Even
though it took 24 hours for me to, I think, reply to your initial text.
That's fine.
At
least you replied. I think a reply within 24 hours is good etiquette. So I'm okay with that, just so you know. But it's also, but you made the choice. We're talking about choices again. You made the choice, and I think you making that choice, coming on here, telling us about the different choices you made during your life, are actually an encouragement to people, not and exposure of the things that you did wrong. So that's
was
what
I
I'm
just
trying.
being a people pleaser?
Well, maybe, but in some ways, God works for the good of all of us. So you might have been, but you also, I think, saying that other people will identify with that too. So that's my favourite part about doing the podcast, is when people share their history and the things that they think they did right and the things they think they did wrong. Is like other people can hear and go, oh yeah, like I went through a similar thing, and we're all encouraging each other together. So thank you very much for being a guest on the Chip Lunch podcast, Sandy, and thank you for tallying up all the chip choices. We'll call it that. So it's really appreciated, and thank you so much for listening to all the podcasts.
And for the record, I do not want to have chips with Wen.
Oh no, I don't think anyone
cold
does.
chips
Come on,
anyway.
Wang. No one agrees with that. It's going to become church folklore now. It's like the guy that freezes his chips or whatever.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I really loved how you've pulled out so many different episodes that you enjoyed too, so that's really cool too.
Oh, and Amelia, slay.
Oh, wow. That's a great way to end the podcast. Ugh, not really. Anyway, thank you again, Sandy. It's been really fun.
Okay,
Thank you for
thanks.
being on. We always finish with one way if you happen to do a one
Sure.
way. Excellent. I always want to ask permission because people are like, what's that? But anyway, thanks everyone for listening or watching if you were. Keep subscribing and enjoying the podcast, and we'll see you next week. And thanks again, Sandy. One way.